I'll never forget the night I made the worst decision of my life. It was a crisp autumn evening, and my best friend Jake and I decided to explore the old textile factory on the edge of town. Everyone in the area had heard the rumors that it was cursed, haunted by the workers who died in a fire decades ago. But Jake and I, we didn't believe in ghosts. We thought it was just a cool story. The factory sat at the end of a desolate road, surrounded by skeletal trees. Its windows were shattered, the roof sagging in places. Rusted machinery was visible through the gaping holes in the walls, and ivy crept over every surface like the place was trying to bury itself. Jake and I were armed with nothing but our cell phones and a flashlight. As we stepped through the crumbling doorway, the smell of mildew and burnt wood hit us like a wall. The air felt heavy, like the building itself was alive and holding its breath. "Come on, it's just an old factory. Nothing to be scared of, man," Jake said. The main floor was filled with rusting looms and conveyor belts. Graffiti covered the walls, mostly random tags, but here and there were strange symbols I couldn't make sense of. As we moved deeper inside, the flashlight flickered, making the shadows dance. And that's when we heard it. A faint, scraping sound, like metal dragging across concrete. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Probably just the wind," Jake replied, but his voice wavered. We followed the sound into a room that must have been the factory's office. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, their drawers pulled out like skeletal fingers. Papers were strewn across the floor, and in the middle of the room was an old wooden desk. The scraping sound finally stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Then we saw it. Movement in the corner of the room. "Hello? Who's there?" Jake called out. A figure stepped into the beam of the flashlight. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. His clothes were charred and tattered, his skin pale and peeling, and his eyes, they weren't normal. They were black pits that seemed to swallow the light. Jake dropped the flashlight, and in that moment of darkness, I swear I felt the air shift, like the thing was moving closer. When I scrambled to pick up the flashlight and turned it back on, the figure was gone. "We need to leave, now," I said, my voice shaking. Jake agreed, but as we turned to leave, the scraping sound returned. This time, louder, closer. It was coming from the hallway we had just walked through. We ran. The building seemed to twist and stretch as we navigated back to the entrance. The walls felt narrower, the shadows darker. Behind us, the sound of footsteps grew louder, faster. When we finally burst out of the building and into the night, I turned to look back, and standing in the doorway was the figure, its black eyes locked onto us. Jake and I didn't speak the whole ride home. We didn't need to. We both knew we'd seen something we couldn't quite explain. Something that wasn't human. I've never gone back to that factory, and I never will. But sometimes, I can still hear the sound of scraping metal outside my window, and I wonder if it followed me home. Let me tell you about the night I stopped believing abandoned buildings were just empty shells. It was last October, a few days before Halloween. My friends, Emma, Carlos, and Mason, and I decided to explore an old church that had been boarded up for years. The The place had a reputation for being cursed, but we thought it was the perfect spot for a spooky night out. The church sat at the edge of town, surrounded by a cemetery choked with weeds. Its once white steeple was now a gray skeleton, and the stained glass windows were shattered, leaving jagged edges that seemed to watch us as we approached. The door was chained shut, but Carlos had brought bolt cutters. He was always the reckless one of the group. Inside, the air was damp and stale. Something in the air smelled metallic. The pews were overturned, hymnals scattered across the floor. The altar was covered in graffiti, some of it vulgar, some of it had strange symbols we couldn't quite understand. "This place is creepy," Emma muttered, shining her flashlight around. "More like abandoned," my friend Mason joked, but even he sounded uneasy. We explored the main hall for a while, taking pictures and laughing nervously. Then Carlos found a door near the back end of the church. It was small and half hidden behind a fallen curtain. "Hey, check this out. I bet this leads to the basement," he said, grinning as he pulled it open. A narrow staircase led down into the darkness. The air that wafted up was colder, thicker, and that metallic smell was stronger. "I don't think we should go down there," Emma said, her voice tight. "Come on, scaredy cat," Carlos teased. Against our own better judgment, we followed him. The basement was a single, cavernous room. The floor was dirt, uneven and damp. In the center of the room was a circle of burnt candles surrounding something covered by a large, stained sheet. "Yo, is this some kind of ritual?" Mason whispered. Carlos approached the sheet and grabbed a corner. "Only one way to find out." "Don't!" Emma hissed, but it was too late. Carlos yanked the sheet away, revealing what laid beneath. It was a body, or what was left of one. The flesh was gray and shriveled, stretched tight over its bones. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, and its eyes, or what should have been its eyes, were hollow pits filled with dried blood. We all froze, too horrified to speak. Then we heard the footsteps coming down the stairs behind us. "Who's there?" Mason called out, his voice trembling. No one answered, but the footsteps didn't stop. "Run," I whispered, and we all bolted for the far end of the basement. There was another staircase there, leading up to what must have been the back of the church. As we scrambled up, I glanced back and saw him, the figure descending the stairs. He was tall, with tattered robes and a face that didn't look human. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and his mouth twisted into a grin that made my blood freeze. We all bursted out into the night and ran straight to Emma's car. Mason called the cops as we sped away, babbling about the body and the figure we'd seen. When the police arrived, they searched the church and found the body exactly where we said it would be. But they didn't find the figure. The cops said the basement door had been chained shut from the outside. To this day, they never figured out who or what was down there with us. But sometimes, I think about those glowing eyes and that twisted grin from that creepy man, and I wonder if it was something that never intended for us to leave. I never should have let her talk me into it. My wife, Sarah, has always had a thing for urban exploration, abandoned places, forgotten history, that sort of thing. Me? I prefer my adventures with a lot less risk and a lot fewer tetanus shots. But she convinced me one Saturday to check out the old Sinclair Manor, a crumbling building on the edge of town. The place had been a hotel once, built in the late 1800s. It was shut down after a series of strange deaths in the 1950s. Nobody bought the land. It just sat there, rotting, with ivy swallowing its facade and windows like hollow eyes staring out at the world. It wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into. You had to make an effort to find it. A narrow dirt path led us through the woods to the looming structure. The air grew colder the closer we got, and the scent of damp earth and decay hit me before we even stepped inside. The front doors hung on their hinges, creaking as Sarah pushed them open. "This is amazing," she whispered toward me, shining her flashlight into the grand lobby. The floor was cracked marble, covered in layers of dirt and debris. An enormous chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dull and cobwebbed. "It's creepy," I muttered, staying close behind her. We wandered through the lobby, Sarah snapping pictures while I tried to ignore the unsettling silence. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the building was swallowing the sound. Then we found the staircase. It spiraled up into darkness, its railings ornate but rusted. "Let's go up," Sarah said, already starting to climb. "Do we have to?" I asked, glancing behind us. The entrance looked farther away than it should have been. "Come on, just a quick look," she said, her excitement bubbling over. I followed her up, the wood creaking beneath our feet. The second floor was lined with doors, each leading to what used to be hotel rooms. Sarah opened one up and peeked inside. "It's just empty," she said, disappointed. We moved on to the next room, and the next, and the next. Most were the same, dusty, empty, and unsettlingly cold. Then we reached the last door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar. "Over here. Maybe this one's different," Sarah said, pushing it open. Inside was a small room with peeling wallpaper and a single chair sitting in the middle of the floor. On the walls, words had been scratched into the plaster, over and over again. "Leave." "I don't like this," I said, backing up. Sarah crouched down to take a closer look at the markings. "These scratches, they look fresh." And that's when we heard it. A whisper, faint and broken, coming from somewhere behind us. "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, her face pale. "Time to go." We turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. The whispers grew louder, coming from all directions now. "What's happening?" Sarah cried out, pulling at the door, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, and I felt something brush past me, invisible but undeniable. Then the chair in the middle of the room tipped over, as if something had pushed it. The whispers turned into a single voice, raspy and full of anger. "You shouldn't be here." I threw myself at the door, ramming it with my shoulder. Finally, on the third try, it flew open and we stumbled out into the hallway. But the building had changed. The walls were warped. The doors we'd passed earlier now sealed shut. We ran, I don't know how we found the exit, but we did. The whispers followed us all the way down, growing louder and louder, getting angrier and angrier. When we finally burst out of the building into the cold night air, it was like the breaking the surface after being underwater too long. We ran until we reached the car, never looking back. That night, Sarah deleted the photos she'd taken of the building. Every single one was blank, except for one. The picture of that last room. In the background, near the chair, was a shadowy figure, just barely visible. We don't talk about what happened in Sinclair Manor, but sometimes I hear faint whispers in the quiet rooms of our home, and I wonder if we really left that place behind, or if something followed us out.